for authors, filmmakers, entertainment, and all your listening needs. Listen now to Talk Now Radio, where no topic is taboo.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me today is William J. Hall. And we're going to discuss his recent book out on the market, The World's Most Haunted House. And I got to tell you guys, I read this here book and, I'm glad I didn't live there. I tell everybody, I recommend you don't read it right before bedtime if you're prone to nightmares, because there was some really a lot of activity over there. But I'm sure William will talk about that in just a minute. William, how you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me, Royce.
I want to thank you for coming on the air there. I kind of got a hold of you a little early. Warwick contacted me about you after I contacted you.
That's funny.
It's a matter of timing.
Yeah.
Anyway, what was it that, and I read it in your book that's here, but this is for the listeners' benefit.
Sure.
What interested you in writing about this here particular book?
Well, it all started, I was doing what every intellectual does in the morning, is have coffee and, mess around on Facebook. And I saw somebody put a post up there and said, anybody remember the house on Lindley Street, the haunted house? And I grew up in Bridgeport and, remembered it was on TV. And when I was 10, I remember asking my dad about it and, at the time. And I had always investigated these kinds of things, being a magician and, growing up that way and writing articles like that for some newspapers as I did in the 1990s. And I was an avid watcher of In Search Of and, all those kinds of shows.
Me too.
Yeah, right. I think all of us were that grew up in that time that end up talking to each other about these matters. But so I saw that and I realized that in my newspaper column, Magic and the Unknown, I never talked about Lindley Street, never really dug deep into it. It was one of those things that was very big and then died down. It was, out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. And so when I saw this post, I decided, let me go online and look at some of the newspaper reports. And the more I read, the more I realized that there was just so many witnesses here, police officers, firefighters, reporters, neighbors, friends, priests, onlookers. It was just too much to say that it was nothing. There definitely was something. And of course, with reading newspapers, it's always tough to tell, so you have to really dig deeper. And I started writing down a bunch of names and ended up finding the lead investigator, Boyce Beatty, who was kind enough to give me all of the interview tapes and everything. And I didn't know if there was going to be a book there or if it was even going to be real. I mean, all I knew is I had 30 hours of interviews, so that's all I did. There was no music. I mean, I was listening to these things everywhere I went. So, So that's how it came about.
How much actual research time altogether did you invest in it?
I would say it was about an 8 or 9 month period. Wow. And I was running on 2 tracks. I was writing, the parts that I knew. Once I had the basics of the story down and the timeline from all of the hours of interviews, I began to write, and at the same time, I was interviewing more people. I was interviewing people who were there in '74 and are still with us, and also new witnesses that came forward or that I found through different means. One is pretty interesting, Royce. It was a high school girl at the time who they were interviewing the parents, and just out of the blue, they said, Susan, you saw that too, didn't you? And she said, oh yeah, So I'm like, wait a minute. And it was just that line. The only time she spoke, the only time they mentioned her name. And, the parents are now gone. And I said, wait, Susan, she would be still with us. So, I tracked her down and she was one I interviewed. So there were, many people who came forward and other people that I was able to really seek out to round out the story like never before, because I added another 10 or 15 hours of interviews to it. So, it really, had legs and I just knew there was a story there. Although it probably took me about 20 hours interviews before it was 100% without a doubt, that this thing was real beyond, your wildest dreams kind of thing. Because, as much as there was nothing that made it seem otherwise, I knew I had to do my due diligence and go through all of the interviews, and
build your case.
Yeah. And there were times when, I'm like, I really don't know. It's sounding good so far, because I talked to a buddy of mine, almost daily, and he's like, well, is it a hoax, or, did something break, or, I'm like, well, no, this other witness was really interesting, and little by little, and then all of a sudden it reached a tipping point where it was just no question. It was 100%. And, because I didn't know if I'd have anything. I mean, it could be 10 hours into it and the whole thing collapses, you don't know. So.
Well, I'll be honest with you. When I first started reading that book and you started talking about Marcia, well, I've read Michael Clarkson's poltergeist phenomena.
Yes.
And guess what the first thing was I thought?
What?
I bet it's her, and it's her emotions going off the scale.
Oh, yeah.
But
yeah, I do
after reading the book, I've seen that it wasn't really quite as simple as that, was it?
No, not at all. And that is one of the poltergeist theories. It's an older theory, but it's still prevalent in many circles. I think all the theories are probably still prevalent to some degree. But and that's that the young child, normally prepubescent or teenage girl over boy 2-to-1, has some sort of frustration that they can't otherwise get out, and causes this recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. So they're not purposely doing it, but it's happening because of them.
And they don't know it; they're unaware.
Right, and they're the agent. But in this case, it all of the, like you said, it just wasn't that simple. I mean, there were actual entities, and things happened when Marcia was nowheres in the house or around, and it just
that's where it started getting more complicated for me, because she would have had to have at least been inside the house somewhere.
Right. Now, she definitely, I think that, the theory, it's pretty clear no matter what theory anybody believes, that she certainly was involved to the extent that these things did seem to target her, or have some sort of negative relationship with her, if you will. But, to how that works, of course, Paulino, who was a 21-year-old seminarian, actually, he probably loves the fact that I still refer to him as Paulino, the 21-year-old seminarian, because he's like 68 now. So it's not bad being known that way. But, this was his first major run-in with poltergeist, and he realized that these things seem to feed off the negative energy, and that's when things got bigger and more activity, and is they fed off the anger, the frustration, the depression, all those kind of negative things, and that when the family is peaceful, or that kind of breaks, it dissipates or goes away, can no longer kind of maintain presence.
Yeah, because it kind of happened off and on there. The one thing that I also noticed was, I just had this on my tongue just a minute ago. Oh yeah, there was no poltergeist activity going on during the first few years they lived there, and up to the time their son died, and even after the time he died. It wasn't until Marcia come home, and really it was sometime after that.
Yes. Yeah, it was shortly after that things started to happen, with a relatively slow build. I think the first major thing was Rosemary, the girl that was the daughter of friends of the Goodins that came over to play cards and alternate it, house to house with the couch lifting, and that was the first real major thing. But to the parents, it was things like saw a door move out of the corner of your eye, your
knives
teeth
fly at you.
Well, that was later. Yeah, that was pretty obvious. That was the obvious part. Yeah.
I would have needed some toilet paper, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Those poor people. But yeah, it was more of a slow, like a slow burn, in the early years, other than the poundings. Every November on and off, they'd have those, poundings, bangings. And
that's the next thing I was noticing was after Marcia was gone, the thing would, start being more off and on than it would be regular, which is another indication that there was a definite connection with her in this matter.
Yeah, I would say that that's a very good possibility. It's somewhat tough to tell because they did shelter her and she was with them most of the time. And I tried to make those kinds of connections, and I think Boyce did too in his report, which I include in the book. But he did point out, because some would say, well, it seemed to be focused on the mother too. But, the mother was home most of the time, and Jerry, of course, had to go to work, and the daughter was home nonstop at this time because she got picked on and beat up. And so it was all that turmoil in the house, and then they were very overbearing with her because their little boy was, died at such a young age. They were basically bringing her up the way they brought him up, and he had cerebral palsy. So there's a lot of tension and frustration, but they were in the house, so often that it is, it's somewhat tough to make that connection, but I think you're right. I think it is a connection nevertheless, but.
Well, I wouldn't say all of it, but I'd say at least a part of it. I got the distinct impression that some of this stuff could have been poltergeist activity radiating from Marcia, but some of it could have also been other entities in the house as well.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Paul brought up the fact to me that he didn't think all the activity was quote unquote, entity driven or purposeful. He thinks some of that activity is almost due to the, if you believe in the multiverse version.
Yeah, I read that part in the back of the deal, and I was like, his theory, while it sounds good, seems to me to be a little bit too all-inclusive.
It does basically, it is a way to explain the similarities between all phenomena, and it definitely is one of the multiverse theories. Of course, there are a number of those theories, and we're getting close to the agreement that the multiverse exists. But what it means and how it takes form, and is it a parallel universe or is it, that's the part that gets fuzzy, and especially for folks like me who, I have a hard time following it, I read about it and stuff, but it's, and you gotta take a bunch of, their words for it because, it's very, very complex science, although so is the existence of an atom. So, I don't mean that it, could very well be the case. It seems like the best theory that I've heard, but again, I'm open to everything because, there's just so much we don't know right now.
That is true. Now, real quick, before I forget, because I already forgot once, if you folks want to call in, the number is 832-632-7904. And if you want to learn more about William and his book, you can go to, pardon me, folks, worldsmosthauntedhouse.com. I got tongue-tied on that. And he has more information there for you that you can learn and get used to. And you can also find more information. I'm going to move his description in that to the archives tomorrow or the next day, and it'll be there for prosperity, along with a link to the book over at Amazon. If y'all are interested in buying it, I'd appreciate it if you click on it from my site because I get a commission. Now, back to where we were at with the book. I got to tell you that the book really, it opened up the room for a lot of thought, because I really had the impression that there was more than one thing going on. It was, and that's why it was so hard to really pin down what it was exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it did meet the classic, poltergeist definition, but you're right. There was a lot to it. Although, there are those kinds of similarities with poltergeist, although I think I know what you mean, Royce, because the entities appeared in 3 different forms, which I don't know how unusual that is, but I haven't come across cases where I've seen that. So I wasn't able to find another case that some cases had other things like fires and, rocks come through the ceiling and, those kinds of things, which makes it even harder for the people to be believed, because it's funny. People believe certain things up to a point, and then it's like, what? Rocks are coming through the ceiling? Oh no, I'm out. It's and I mean, it's all crazy. So, let's face it, it's all very, none of it is, if it was simple, we wouldn't be talking about it. But, so I've seen things like that, but I haven't come across the different formed, entities as of yet in a poltergeist case, specifically. And there were other houses that were affected, and one of them had an even 4th, type of entity. So that may or may not feed to, Paul's, not that it's his theory, but, a multiverse theory or something opening where things come out of whatever we believe that is, whether it's a multiverse or whatever. For me, sometimes it's hard to believe. To me, it doesn't seem like it appeared to give any evidence of being a demon. We throw that word around, but, who knows? I mean, I don't know, but, I don't know what makes us think it's a demon. Did it do something evil? I'm not really sure. Definitely.
I think people are a little bit too quick with that word, if you ask me.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I definitely don't think it's anywhere near as evil as any of the people outside in the crowd were. At least you can argue this thing was away from home and didn't know what the heck it was doing or where it was going, or I bring up example that, as a magician, it's not only about finding out if something's a hoax. I mean, that's relatively easy, and most good paranormal investigators, could do that. Maybe they can't do it if it's a seance, or maybe it's harder if it's a psychic, because they're not skilled in those performance, skills. But when it comes to the, paranormal, most good investigators could pretty quickly, kind of weed out and tell what fits and what doesn't. But for me, it's the thinking is a little bit different. I'll give you a very quick example. I try to look and see, why do we come to that conclusion? Like, with a refrigerator floating, people would say, well, it couldn't have floated. It's 300 pounds. And as a magician, I'd say, well, is it a real refrigerator? You know what I mean? It's a difference in thinking. You wouldn't think.
Is it hollowed out?
Yeah. Is it a fake refrigerator? Is it carbon? No, it wasn't. It was a 300-pound refrigerator. But, and the police were very good because they looked under it and went down in the basement and looked at the ceiling. So they did all the right things, which was wonderful. Everybody did such a great job in this case. Boyce's questions, were wonderful as an interviewer. So much so that I mean, at first I was worried maybe he wouldn't ask detailed enough questions, and then I wouldn't be able to make a conclusion. But instead, he really was detailed with the questions. So, and the way he went about it. But it's just a level of thinking. Like we think a possession is, we think when somebody is acting as if they're possessed, is the word we use. We think that something is taking over the body, but we never think of other kinds of things. Well, maybe it's not taking over the body. Maybe it's stuck there and doesn't want to be there anymore, and you want it to be there. I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm just saying, we need to kind of look at all of these things
and not kind of jump to a cause and effect is never quite as simple, even in our own regular physical world, as we think it is. You know, there are many.
That is true.
Yeah, I mean, there are many
things are not always as they appear to be.
Right, and there's many things that appear to have cause and effect that really don't. And so when we see these things, we say, oh, somebody's possessed, and it's evil, they've taken over the body. I mean, that could be true, or could it be somebody stuck and doesn't want to be there?
Or could it be somebody putting on a grand act that has you fooled because they want to scare you?
Well, yeah, I mean, and mental illness always has to be, eliminated and stuff. So there's a lot of things involved, definitely. In fact, Dr. Andrew Nichols has some great research and cases that he's done, and you read through them, and it really sounds like the paranormal, and then all of a sudden you realize, and he reveals that this was, there was mental illness involved, and even though there was another witness, that person was kind of feeding their illness. And it's so very, very, very strange how complicated these things could be. So you really have to make sure you have all the right, players involved, because nobody has all of the expertise.
Then others would ask, well, are these people really mentally ill, or are they possessed? And of course, you get in a circular argument that nobody wins.
Right. And I guess, I mean, that would be where experience comes in. And then, because, obviously if somebody doesn't believe at all, then it never is. And if somebody believes, it may be more often than it is. So yeah, they're difficult things. It doesn't make our jobs easier, definitely.
Yeah, that's why when a lot of cases I get in a situation like that, I just say time will tell and leave it there.
Right.
Time tells all. So.
But, in some of these cases, I mean, there was there was a famous poltergeist case where the investigator pretended to be asleep, to see if he can catch the girl doing something. And, of course, that's when he realized that this thing was real, and it, blew his mind. So, but
you're friends with Ed Beckham, and I was going to say he had a seance. I'm wondering why Jerry didn't do that. Did you talk to anybody that might have shed some light on that?
Well,
or not a seance, but an exorcist. I'm sorry.
Oh, an exorcist. They were pushing for that in the Lindley Street home, and of course, because of the publicity, nobody really was going to want to the church didn't want to get involved in that nightmare of a train wreck. I mean, you've got a story that really spread, around the world, and nobody wants to be involved in that at such a public level. Not a lot of good can come of it. So they just held a course and said, we don't have any evidence that this is anything but natural causes. And, they just stuck to that story until it was out of the public eye. But the other reason, was, I mean, some within the house, Father Charbonneau and Ed Warren too, they also, as much as they push for an exorcism, they also wondered if it would even help, because of the nature of the phenomena. So they weren't really sure that it was the right thing to do once they, saw the nature of the case. But they did push for it because there wasn't a lot of other things that
wanted something better to do.
Right. So
now I read in the book that Lorraine Warren had actually burned her hand under hot water.
Marcia was asked, how did Lorraine get the burn? And Marcia said she put her hand under hot water.
That's where I got the idea. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she answered any question that they told her, and she guessed a lot. Like they asked her, well, what was this? Underground springs. Well, that's what her dad used to say. Jerry used to say he thought it was underground springs, so she would repeat that. So, I mean, Lorraine was never near, she wasn't running her hand under hot water, and Paulino had some medical training and was able to tell that, it was a real burn. So, which I did ask because, as part of a good investigator, I want to get to the bottom of it. I mean, I knew Lorraine was the real deal, but I also didn't want somebody to ask me a question like that and not have the answer. But so it was a real burn. But again, they were asking Marcia these leading questions, and she often guessed, and they took it as fact, and the parents overheard it, and they didn't really know what to make of it. And that's when they, turned Paul and Father Charbonneau and the Warrens away because they thought perhaps they had embellished the case, especially since Ed made some toll calls from the house.
Yeah, I know.
And they were very poor, so but truth be told, they probably wouldn't have made a big deal of that if the other thing didn't happen, and it was just a rough situation. So
well, in Ed's defense, as many times as he's done this, I'm pretty sure that he was probably used to doing that and didn't think twice about it.
Right. Well, of course, he used the phone to call more media, which they would have found out anyhow. I mean, the story was already out. It kind of spread. His big thing was he wanted everybody to know, and so he wanted everybody to know, and this was a case that already went public, so he figured let's get everybody to experience this and see that it's real.
Except for the fact there got to be such a big crowd there, they weren't letting people in after a certain point to experience it.
Right.
And I think the way you described it in the book was there was like thousands of people out there?
Yeah, about 2,000 people, and traffic was blocked, for about a mile in all directions, and it was crazy. They had to close the street down, and it was quite a scene.
Which is why when it was hinted that Marcia was hoaxing a little bit, the police saw an opportunity to bail out and let it be somebody else's problem.
Right. It wasn't a conspiracy as many people thought. It was a natural evolution. The police officers that saw that, her tip the TV with her foot, kick it out and spin it. They really thought that this was, a hoax because they didn't see or have the level of detail of what happened previously. And then when they reported it to Inspector Clark, he was given this case very late in the game, and he was told by Superintendent Walsh at the time, here you go, Clark, shut this down. Shut it down. I want it to go away. So, when he heard this, he said, well, like he's told Jerry Sulfan, one of the other investigators on this case, said, Jerry, I'm sorry. I did the best I could with what I had. And, he didn't want to do it that way, but it had to stop. I mean, the crowds are getting, absolutely, crazy. I mean, they're, banging on the windows and throwing things at the house and chipping off pieces of the swan as a souvenir, and even tried to burn the house down in Thanksgiving, So, it was really, police were scared of what was going to happen because, it wasn't getting good, and the crowd was, every day that goes by that where this thing is deemed real, more people are going to show up, more press, and the thing just gets bigger and bigger. I refer to this as the Roswell of haunted houses. I mean, this is what happened with Roswell, right? Went around the world and then boom, weather balloon, got to do something, we don't know what to do. This thing's out of hand. We got to think, shut it down. And same thing here. If you don't shut it down, people are going to keep coming. They're already, it was in newspapers in Israel. So, I mean, this thing was big news.
Oh yeah, especially ghost hunters. They'll trample the place.
Well, yeah, there's that too. But, just the people outside there was, they're, and they even went by with a child's, a coffin, and that really, really got to Jerry because, He, his 6-year-old son had died and was buried in a coffin like that. So, I mean.
Yeah, that was just heartless.
Yeah, well, I mean, they didn't know, you know what I mean? They didn't know the connection. They just got their hands on it and thought it'd be a cool joke. And, that's the way it goes,
Well, as I understood from reading it, most of the people outside that couldn't see in, was given to thinking it was a hoax too. And most everybody inside that saw it going on, was pretty convinced it was not a hoax, or at least not all of it.
Well, I think the people outside were probably mixed depending on who they are. I don't want to speak for them, but the ones that stayed there hour after hour, almost like a vigil, I mean, they definitely knew something was going on that was real, especially after they saw the police and firemen, leave the house. They definitely, and a good portion of them saw, at least the ones in the front, saw the swans move at various times and heard a guttural voice from the swans. The police reported that too back at the station, because they were right there when they were watching the house. They say from the swans, but the reality is there was audio phenomena there, and if the swans are nearby, then they get blamed for it.
Yeah.
That's the way. Just like with the cat.
Yeah, I'd say just like with the kids.
Yeah, there was phenomena with the cat, and part of it is the cat kind of making weird noises at the ear, because animals, as they can sense those kinds of things. And then the other part of it is Marcy messing around playing ventriloquism, which really didn't fool. It really wasn't anything that fooled people. Like Paul told me, that was obvious. The other part was the audio phenomena, where Jerry said, the cat was banging at the door and, yelling at him. Well, he said the cat was doing it. And he didn't see the cat do it. He didn't see anything. It was a closed door. So, there was this audio phenomena that got attributed to various things. And there was also the footsteps and the knocks on the door and, some of the other classic kind of poltergeist and spirit activity.
Well, some of the things that could not be denied would be like situations with Marcia in the recliner and it lifting up off the floor with her in it.
Yes, that was the part that really got to me, because she was talking to police officers when that happened. I mean, this thing was not. That's really what really drew me to this case. Is this house was not located in the middle of the fields, where nobody's around and there's no witnesses except for one small town cop who now we can't find. And, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. I mean, this is just a tiny house that really shouldn't qualify to be a haunted house because it's too small. It doesn't have a spiral staircase or hidden rooms. It's just a tiny little 738 square feet house in the middle of the city. And all this stuff's happening. And, when this happened, Marcia was, she had her legs under her and her arms on her lap, and she's talking to the police, and the chair floats up and does a 360 and knocks her out of the chair. And if the house wasn't so small to hit furniture behind, they feared she could have really, really hurt herself. But yeah, you're right, Royce. That was, there was a few real defining moments, and that was one where the police definitely, took notice, because when you have a room full of people and they're all watching this thing happen, it's there was nothing hidden there. There was just a lot of witnesses and a lot of things happening, and of course periods where nothing happened as these things ebb and flow, which is why on Tuesday when the other officers saw Marcy doing that, and they're like, well, we don't see anything happening. Everybody wants it on command, and we all know it doesn't work that way. In fact, when they asked Marcy, why did you hit the TV? She said, I wanted to see what the demon would do. So, I mean,
but there's a clue that she's seeing demons possibly, or at least what she would describe as a demon with her understanding.
Right. I mean, it proves that she knew there was real stuff going on. She wasn't saying that they said she admitted to doing it all, but I mean, she's saying right there she wanted to see, if something real would happen, basically. And the other thing that was really neat is when Marcy was interviewed in this case, They asked her questions, and she readily admitted anything she did. Was that you pretending to make the cat talk? And she would say, yeah, that was me. And was that you that made or how did the recliner go back so fast? I don't know. And when you went back in the recliner later, how did that happen? Oh, that was me. You know what I mean? So she differentiated between, when she was messing around and when things actually, were happening to her. So, so yeah, there were a few things. People say, well, Marcy faked it. Well, there was a few things, but it was very obvious. The mother would yell at her, Marcy, stop messing around, get out of the chair. I mean, it wasn't any secret that it was very, very different than what they were witnessing at the height of the phenomena. And like police officer Joe Tomic tells me, and he gets defensive, and rightfully so, if you're talking about those other officers, he said, well, they weren't there. They weren't there at the time. I don't know what they saw. I don't know what their experience was, but they didn't see what I saw. And if they saw what I saw, that would be a different story. Then, they're not idiots. They know what a broken motor mount is in a refrigerator, and all the other excuses people gave as guesses as to how things happen. But if you weren't there, then, your details wouldn't hold any muster. And that's why I knew I had to go deeper into this case, because from the newspapers, you can't really tell one way or another. It's the, of course, the surface items, and you needed a lot of details to really know. And the public didn't have those details. So once the public's told it's a hoax, everybody goes home, because they don't have all the details. This is what the police actually saw. This is what actually happened. These are the details. This is where it lifted. This end lifted up here. Nobody was in the room. They don't have all those minute details. They just have, of course, the surface story. So
then, too, not everybody in there was a trained observer.
Yes, that's true. Definitely. But, I mean, the people who went in there, other than, the police at the end, the people that went in there were either convinced it was real, or certainly said, I don't know what it is, but, I can't explain it, they didn't know. Some didn't want to put a label on it. They just called it, something unknown, and others, of course, put a label on it, But what I think would be cool now, if it's okay with you, Royce, I'd like to play some audio.
Yeah, I was fixing to ask you about that. I didn't want to run out of time. Go ahead and see if we can get it to play through here. Yep. Chat room, type in there if y'all hear the MP3, I guess it is, playing.
And yes, and just to cue it up for you, the Goodins, this is the family it happened to, their neighbor who lived across the street, who was also a friend and also a Bridgeport police officer. And he was off duty at the time this happened in the morning, when the Goodins just couldn't handle it anymore. And they were on the porch, and they found the daughter of the police officer, and said, hey, go get your father, we're in trouble. And they went and got Officer John Holsworth from across the street, interrupting his little, morning routine, and he came running across the street. And this interview is later in the day, and he's going to tell you what his experience is, and you could tell he's a little thrown off by it. So here we go. It's about 3 minutes, but I think you'll enjoy it. So
okay.
975 Lindley Street. And you're with the Bridgeport Police Department? Yes, sir. Can you tell me, did you respond to the call? Yes, I did. My daughter was walking the dog, and she ran into the house and said, Jerry and Laura, which we know them by, had an emergency when I come right over. Oh, I come over and found the two of them on the porch hysterical. And what did you find when you came into the house? I come in and I found everything array. I mean, just disarray. The table's over, the chair's over, the icebox moved, the television moved, and I was the only one in the house, and they were still on the porch. Did you actually see anything move yourself? Yes, I did. I just told you. I saw the icebox move. I saw the television move. I straightened the television. It turned around. I saw the chairs open and close. Was there any other phenomenon that you observed? Nothing else other than selling people down. I said, did you also see the cat? No, the cat was not around. Okay. And did you also witness the little girl in the chair that was pushed back in the front room? Can you tell us about that? Yes, I did. I seen her fly back 3 or 4 times. This later on in the afternoon, I left and come back and saw this. And did you test the chair to see whether it was possible that the girl could do it herself? No, there was no way. There was a priest here at the time when I returned across the street who tried it himself, as big as I am. I'm 6'2". I weigh 220 pounds, and he couldn't move it. And she just flew back like there was nothing. Have you ever been involved in any psychic phenomenon before in your years on the police force? 15 years, no. Nothing. What was your belief in hauntings and poltergeist activity before? You probably heard about it. What's your belief now? I thought it was a poltergeist right away when I thought about it. And I believe in this, but I don't follow it. I said, anything can happen. I said, so you were surprised. I mean, you came to this believing that it could happen. No, everything can happen. Anything can happen. How was this reported in the police department? What kind of a report would be turned in? I don't know. I have to make a report myself. I was called by the Lieutenant Coco, Bridgeport Police Department, who observed and controlled the scene here today. I said, did he observe any phenomenon, do you know? I don't know. Other officers at the scene, I had to make my report, like I say, and get names of the other officers who did observe. Were there many officers who observed? There was 10 or 12. And also, I believe there were firemen also. Firemen also, right. Firemen were here. It was 10 firemen, 2 chiefs. And they observed the phenomenon that actually had seen things happen. I don't know what their activity was. I wasn't here. I was across the street watching my baby when the firemen arrived. But they walked out of here and they were afraid. I see. Thank you very much, officer.
And so that's Officer John Holsworth and many police officers. Actually, boy, one of the reel-to-reels was 8 hours of police officer interviews.
Wow. So you have all this stuff on tape?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, all converted, and then I had to transcribe it. That was a pain. So
I bet it was.
I didn't do it, but still.
Genocide in the chat room said that he could hear it play, so we're covered there.
Great. I'm glad.
Now, didn't you have another one you wanted to play as well?
No, that's the one that I had queued up.
Okay. Well, I got to tell you, when you hear an actual police officer reporting in and they're seeing this activity and describing it as poltergeist, it gets kind of hard to get any more credible than that.
Yeah, and I think, what's interesting is after this thing was announced a hoax, the very same inspector and captain that, said publicly that it was a hoax, when Jerry Sulfin called the police department, this is after it was all over and they wanted to do the investigation and help the family because it was still going on. Inspector Clark said, thank God you called. He was happy he called, and he was in there the next morning, spent about 2.5 hours meeting with him, going over, files and testimony, and said, look, we'll give you whatever you need. We'll set up a conference room here. Whatever police officer you need to interview, we'll make him interview. And, Joe Tomic told me when I first talked to him, he said, I was forced to be interviewed at the police station. He said, I don't know who those guys were or what, and that, of course, then I found out the other side of it and, who they were and what it was about. But, Joe had confirmed that, they had a conference room set up there and Jerry had called and got right in and they basically gave him, full complete access. In fact, on one of the audio, there's an interruption because they need another officer to be, out. And, when they find out, he's in an interview, say, oh, no, stay here because, Captain Fabrizi, this is more important, he says. So, I mean, this is how important the police department took it. So on the outside, it was officially, deemed a hoax, but behind the scenes, after it was all deemed a hoax, they gave full access to the police department, even setting up a conference room right at the department itself, to have these hours and hours of interviews with police officers completed as part of the investigation to help the family. So.
Well, is that house occupied today?
It doesn't appear to be. It appears like it's been unoccupied for a few years. I tried to contact the owner, but I don't get any return calls, and I wrote letters and things like that. But I don't know why. I mean, I'm not that stalkerish, a little bit, but
well, wasn't there also a neighbor that had similar occurrences after the Gooden's occurrences were over and they'd moved out or whatever they did?
Well, I just recently, at the dentist's office, in fact, the hygienist, who would think something good would happen at the dentist's office, said she spoke to somebody at a party probably 5 years ago or so, wasn't really sure of the timeline, and said that the person lived in that house and didn't know the history behind it, had all sorts of problems and had to move out. So, and that's the first I've ever heard, because normally, with poltergeist, it's more of a haunted family than a haunted house. But, of course, it being, the place where whatever entered, it makes sense. It certainly could have happened. But unfortunately, she doesn't know the person's name. And, so it could have been a tenant or it could have been the owner. It's hard to tell. That house has only been owned by one, it was sold in 2000, the year 2000. Before that, it was with the Goodins up till their death, and then it went to the brother. I still consider that kind of in the same family because that was more of an estate, transfer.
Right.
And then he sold it off in 2000, and the same people own it today. So, but it looks like it's been unoccupied for I don't know how many years, 3 years or so, so.
Well, one of the things I read early on in the book, unless I misunderstood it somehow, was that at one point Marcia was having some kind of psychic contact or spiritual contact with her grandfather. Was it on the Indian reservation?
Well, it's hard to say what that is. Whether I hear that when I investigated, I hear that that's not an uncommon thing for them to do, almost like praying. And she may have been using some native words or whatever she was doing, rocking back and forth. Some people will take that as psychic. Others will say it's she's evil, and others would say, like myself, that we really don't know, but most likely it was more of a prayer thing. And when she said my grandfather's angry that I'm here, she's probably really talking about herself. That would be my guess. I have to assume, like I said with the Occam's razor, I have to assume the most logical of explanation and only go to the extraordinary stuff where it seems warranted. And in this case, it doesn't appear like there was overall abilities of any kind throughout the case. So I would say that's probably just her saying, just like you'd say, so-and-so says I should have a cookie, or, it's another voice to say it, especially being secluded and introverted like that, saying her grandfather, doesn't want her there.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think there's any actual contact. Of course, that's my opinion, but
I was really thinking along the lines of, if they were doing anything psychic, could they open up a portal for other spirits to come through in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a Native American connection with a lot of this stuff. I don't know, what's behind that, if it's just because they're more, open to it, almost like, better eyes than us. Of course, us Westerners, we don't have good eyes for this stuff most of the time, because we just don't look for it and look at the world in the same mindful way that, some of these other cultures do.
Right.
But so, I mean, is it possible? Sure. But again,
we're dealing with probable.
Yeah. I wanted to put it in there because I thought it was an interesting observation, but what it meant, I don't think it was a major part of.
It may not have been, but I tell you what, I think it's good you put it in there because if by any chance you find out further down the road it was, at least it's been addressed. And if you don't, there was something else, well, it didn't hurt anything.
Right. Well, yeah, I think it's important because like you said, all these details are good for discussion and make people think, and other people may have a different case or other cases that were similar and now could start drawing some similarities. So I definitely wanted to include everything that I really thought was, pertinent to the case. There was a few things and they were minor that I really couldn't verify. And if I couldn't verify them, then I didn't want them in the book, or I wanted it to be a footnote where it says, hey, I think, this may be true, but, we're not really sure, couldn't verify it, but most of it, luckily the details, were there, in much more readily than you'd find in any other case, except for one that, you were personally there through, this was something where, nothing in that book is made up. So I really I was constrained and also, empowered by the details that were left. I was able to look up the weather for then and, but it was really good that people, would make little comments that would add that detail, like, oh, it was bitter cold this night. Oh, what night was that? Or, and make sure I added all that in there so that, got it as detailed as possible. Because again, I'm constrained. I can't make up stuff. So I'm constrained by, what's revealed and what I can research. So, but luckily there was just a lot of richness to those interviews because they were so extensive.
Yeah, it was. You put a lot into that book. I got to ask you though, are you trading in your cane and top hat for a typewriter and paper?
No, well, the magic now I do is a hobby. Years ago I used to do so many, I used to do nonstop shows but it is nice that, writing has the aspect of, the lecturing and talking to people.
You like to meet people.
Yeah, making people happy in whatever way. So
people person.
Yeah. I like the alone time and I like the people. And so, so writing now has both those things, not like years ago where, you write and you just never do anything. Today you have to do everything. So, and I think that's a good thing,
So we can probably expect more books out of you in the future?
Yes. I do have an idea for a second book.
Can you, whet our appetite any?
Yeah, there's a case going on in Connecticut here, that really has just about all kinds of phenomena happening, including a makeshift government base. So,
makeshift government base?
Yeah, the government's there trying to figure out what's going on. There's been UFO sightings and, abduction history. A few of the houses have, paranormal problems and the focal point of the story is a house that's been haunted for many, many years, and it's still going on today. So,
well, as long as you go through New Page Books, you'll hear from me every time you got one coming out.
Yeah, they're great. I love those guys. So,
yeah, they usually send me a copy of the book and a media kit and give me time to read it, and then they ask me a week or two after they send it to me if I'm interested in interviewing the author. And I got to tell you, I've taken at least 99% of the authors and interviewed all of them.
Well, that's great. Yeah,
but I'm kind of a people person. I enjoy talking to people.
Yeah, that's. That makes sense because especially for doing what you're doing. So, but yeah, it's great. It's a whole new world of radio too, with the internet and all the access to all these archive shows and things. So, I encourage everybody to search out all of Royce's shows on Talk Now Radio, because it's not just Talk Now; it's Talk Anytime, right?
Actually, I got the podcast, so yeah, you can turn it on and listen anytime.
There you go. See, it's Talk Anytime. No, I know you'll still get to sleep. Don't worry.
Now, I got to ask you this before I let you loose.
Sure.
Is there anything you would like to cover that I didn't think to ask?
Well, I just like to end by saying, this case is a perfect example of why, paranormal, will never truly be accepted as fact simply because hundreds or even thousands of people witness it. I mean, we know that from Hudson Valley UFO sightings in Roswell, and now we know it from Lindley Street, that really it's got to be so widespread and so visible that there's nowhere to hide. And I think that's what Ed Warren hoped that this case, or knew that this case was. But it does show that. But, my biggest hope, and the reason that I wrote this is for anybody that is at least open to it. This will give you the proof that you need, and it gave me the proof I need to say, yeah, Lindley Street is the real deal. Obviously, if you don't believe in anything, then you're not going to believe in this, and if you believe in everything, you'll believe in this anyhow. And I don't think either one of those things are good. So that's really what I tried to do. But that's the big lesson that I learned, that what really doesn't matter how many witnesses you have. In the end, we're still at a level where it comes to belief. Until, of course, it happens to you. If it happens to you, then, whole different story, right?
Then you buy a lot of moist towelettes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, I was going to say something. I had it on the tip of my tongue and my brain went, I was going to mention also to you that I'm going to send you the links to the archives. There's going to be a copy at Daily Motion. It's going to be a 30-minute copy with a link back to my archive. And there's going to be the full show at YouTube. And then there's going to be a full show here at my site. My site's going to have the entire description and everything, linked to the book and all that I can't put on YouTube, in other words. And I'll send you all three of the links.
Great. Well, I'm glad I wore my tux for this interview. So.
Did it get that deep?
Yeah. I wore my tux. I hope everybody noticed. This isn't just radio, is it, Royce? I mean, no.
Yeah, actually, it is just radio. I'm too ugly to go live on the air with a face.
Yeah, well, I'm not in tux either, I got to admit. So,
All righty. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure meeting you, William, and I've really enjoyed. You might prefer Bill.
Bill's fine.
Yeah. Been a pleasure interviewing you. You're a great guest, and I hope that you'll be back in the future.
I'd love to. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Royce.
Been a pleasure talking to you too. And you listeners out there, don't forget to come see me tomorrow at Revolution Radio. I'm going to be interviewing Mike Barra on his newest book, Ancient Aliens on Mars, book 2. And then after that, Archon Invasion, about the Nephilim and the ancient astronaut theory, with, I think his name was Rob Skiba. He's new to me, so I haven't got his name memorized yet. And it ought to be pretty interesting. It'll be a 2-hour show, 1 hour per each guest. Come over there and see me, and don't forget the players in the chat room. Y'all have a good night, and see you then.